All right, hello there. I believe we are live. Hello to everyone. I am happy that we are finally able to have a live stream after a month and a half. It has been a long time. Originally, I thought that I would be doing live streams roughly every 2 weeks, but life got in the way, and so that was unfortunately not possible, particularly in October. Whew, there weren't any live streams in October, but luckily we were able to do a live stream here in November. I'm very excited. And hymns are beautiful. Hello, welcome, thank you. Glad that you are here to join us. Um, we'll give everyone a few minutes to join. If you're new to the channel, my name is Jonathan Cohn, and I am a booktuber. And as you can see, I have this massive book drop, and I love talking all things books. Gay book reader 123, hello. Glad to have more book readers. If you have any questions, Revan 1207, hello. Great to see you. If you have any questions, leave them in there. Or if you want to generate conversation, I'd love to generate some conversation with you guys. I have some topics that I can talk about until we have some questions. I have topics such as some upcoming videos that I have coming very soon. I also have topics such as some recent book hauls that I've done. Lisa, DW, hello, welcome to great to have you. And then I also have some topics on a few other things, some recent book news stuff. So Root Book Reader says, I'm aware you and I are quite different. You teach at a Christian school, but I respect your presentation, and you have a great speaking voice, handsome too. Oh, thank you. That's very nice. Ninja Badger says, just started Thrawn Treason today when I got this notification. Book Reader says, but you're the best book reviewer on this thing. Well, thank you. I try to not be present anger too much. Try to present positive reviews and generate more discussions. Every book is someone's favorite, so I want everyone to enjoy it. And I try to, admit when I don't like something, but try not to dwell on things like that. Lazy Fishy, hello, great to have you. Going back to Ninja Badger's comment, Thrawn Treason, it's a very popular book. It was a book that when I read it initially, I didn't realize it would have the impact that it did, but it works really well on reread. And my friends that read it, they loved it. They really loved it. For some of them, it was their favorite book in the new Thrawn trilogy, which is interesting. The first one for me is. Landrew Mack says, I'm reading it. Interesting. Are you liking it? Is it really dark? Like I know it has the 80s atmosphere, but I'm not sure if it's like as dark as people are saying throughout. I know there's moments of it, but I'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on it. I've thought about buying it so many times, and I'm just like, there's just so many more books I want to read more than it. But I'd always be interested potentially in reading it. I'm glad to have you here, everyone. So why don't I begin before I have questions? Talk about some recent books I was able to get. So I actually have had the book Navigators of Dune, which is the third book in the Kevin J. Anderson, Brian Herbert trilogy that they wrote. The Schools of Dune trilogy. But I got the third book as it was thrown in when I purchased a bunch of other books from Kevin Anderson, but I didn't have the first two books in the trilogy, and I've always wanted to read them. And then we got the news that they're turning Sisterhood of Dune, the book, into a TV show. So I was like, well, I have to read it now. So I recently was able to acquire used copies of Sisterhood of Dune and Mentats of Dune to complete the full trilogy with Navigators of Dune. Very happy to be able to have all three books here. I also have been buying some other books in other genres. I recently bought John Grisham's The Litigators. I think I have like 7 or 8 John Grisham books that I own now. I just finished The Summons. That book review will be happening eventually. That was a very different book than the John Grisham books that I've read. I have a very different take on it. So then I also have The Arithmetist by Brandon Sanderson. I've always wanted to read this book. It's one of the few Sanderson books I don't own, but never found it anywhere, really. It's not found in many bookstores anymore. So finally was able to get it. I'm very excited. We have some comments ready to discuss. Gay Book Reader 123 says, I have a BA of history and getting a BS in middle grade education. I am focusing on social studies, language arts, but in my state, Ohio, the focus is on ELA more so than social studies at that age, right? And in my school, they have had it where fifth grade and or sixth grade has been entirely like one class where you taught everything, all the subjects. But we changed it to fifth and sixth is like its own separate school, and they have different teachers that they go to just because the way they wanted to do things. And so I just teach history for those two. And it's so much fun. I could not teach science. I could not teach science or math. Ninja Badger says, have you read any Andy Weir? He's one of my favorites. Yes, I read The Martian and I loved it. And I own Artemis, though I haven't read it yet. But I will read it eventually because I loved The Martian. It was one of my favorite books of 2021. I mean, I think it was 2020. Or was it 2020? Whenever I read The Martian, it was one of my favorite books that year. So that book, I do want to read Artemis. I have not read Project Hail Mary, although from what I've read, it sounds like it would be of the three, it would be the most interesting to me. And of course, Sanderson blurbed it, which is good. I do want to read it. I just don't own that one yet, but I will get to them because Weir's obviously a good author. If he can turn in The Martian, that alone earned him a high ranking for me among science fiction authors. Revan 1207 says, I've only read the first Dune book, thought it was just okay. Would you suggest continuing with the rest of the series and seeing if I like the rest more? Well, I'll say this. You read Dune Messiah, you will be probably disappointed because I was highly disappointed with Dune Messiah. And then I read Childrenhood of Dune and I was like, the first book to me, it has been the high watermark. The reason I bought the Dune prequels and sequels by Kevin Anderson and Brian Herbert is because I'm such a big Kevin Anderson fan and I like his style, and I know his style is different from Frank Herbert, so I think I might actually like the prequels better than the original books. But that being said, I loved the first Dune book. I thought it was the best I've read so far, so I really enjoyed it. Techno Viking says, hi Jonathan, have you ever read books by Dennis McKiernan? Dennis McKiernan. I don't think I have, and I don't know that name. What genre? I'd be interested in. I'd be interested in reading or finding out what genre they write in. Raffinetti says, when you have the luxury of options, do you swear more by hardcover books or paperback versions? It actually, even with the money, it depends. Hardcover, I will always state that hardcover books always, I think, look better and work better on shelves, and they're just nicer. They're premium. There's a reason they cost more. But paperbacks, particularly mass market and tall rack mass market, are much easier reads than hardcovers, or much easier reads than trade paperbacks for me. Hardcovers, they have bigger font, but the process of reading the book, it's so big in your hands that it's actually more tiresome. I don't read as many words per sitting when I read a hardcover than when I do a mass market paperback, because I'm able to much faster read because I don't get tired as much, if that makes sense. And my eyes are still good enough that I don't have to squint, or having smaller words on a mass market doesn't affect me as much. So I prefer for reading a mass market, but for if money was absolutely zero option, I'd buy a hardcover and a paperback. I'd read the paperback and keep the hardcover on the shelves. That's what I do. But sometimes that's not possible. Like with my Star Trek books, for most of them, there are no hardcovers. So it's just not possible. But for some things like Star Wars, like I do buy all of the Star Wars hardcovers for the canon. For EU, I'm way behind on buying the hardcovers. I have almost all the paperbacks, but hardcovers I'm way behind on. So I hope that answers your question. Ninja Badger says they're making a Project Hail Mary movie too, I've heard. Ooh, I'd be interested in watching it. The Martian, not only was the book phenomenal, but the movie was also phenomenal, surprisingly for how fast they rushed it into development and how little money they actually spent on the movie. I wish it had gotten more awards because it was a superb movie. Chris says, I'm surprised that you don't focus on English literature and teach that. I get the love of history being history after all, but I'm surprised you don't teach ELA. So my thing is that if I tried to teach English, I would get way too frustrated because I'm not a huge fan of classics. I will read them, and some of them I enjoy, but I just don't like classics, and I don't like the way they generate book discussions in schools. Actually, the way that they do it at my school is actually a little bit nicer because I actually am really enjoying because I'm reading along with the English teacher. I'm reading along the books she's having them do, and she's moving them in the direction that I like, but they're still not all the way there, to where I would this types of books that I'd want to read. So history is also history is actually like a long time love of mine. I spend more time thinking about books and talking about books with people, but history and politics was my love since I was a little kid. Like I was always staying up for election night. I was always going to Civil War museums and stuff. So I've always loved talking about that stuff. So I'm hoping to merge the two. But for right now, I'm just doing history. Linda Rage says The Martian was fabulous. I've read it twice. Just bought Project Hail Mary. Can't wait to start that one. You guys are gonna make me buy more books. I need to buy Project Hail Mary. Reverend 1207 says, I will always take a paperback over a hardcover. The only time I go out and intentionally buy a hardcover if it's a series I'm invested in and want to read as soon as it's out. That's a good point. Sometimes I will buy a hardcover because I'm caught up and I want to read the series right now. For instance, I own almost all of Brandon Sanderson's books in mass market paperback, but the new Lost Metal comes out on this Tuesday, and this is the first time ever that I've been caught up with Brandon Sanderson's series when the new book comes out. So unless I want to wait a year for the paperback, it might even be more. Sometimes it's for the Rhythm of War paperback, it was 2 years. It's crazy. Or not 2 years, a year and a half. But unless I want to wait that long for the paperback, I need to buy the hardcover. But the thing is, like, I spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about displays. Like, the displays are obviously important for my channel, so I have to spend a little money to get the nice displays. So Raffanetti says, I agree. To me, it's more akin to scrolling vertically on an app on an iPhone versus an iPad. The wider nature of a hardcover makes the process slower. Yep, it does. Says, for my Star Wars books, the only ones I don't have in hardcover is Tarkin, since it was about $300 on Amazon versus $18 for the paperback. Yes, I went to I started reading the hardcovers for the canon in 2015, and I've been kept up ever since. I've been kept up with it since 2016, so I've never been far behind. So the only real books that I was like way behind on in the canon were A New Dawn and Tarkin, well, New Dawn is amazing. Tarkin's actually grown on me a little bit. It's bumped up on rereads, but I didn't have those in hardcover. I went to McKay's books in Chattanooga, and I found both of them for like 15, which is, as you said, way less than 300. They've been going for 200 to 300 in that range. So I got it for $15 and I snatched them both up. And so, yeah, if I hadn't found them there, I probably wouldn't even own Tarkin, because it's hard to find. For some reason, it was a book that didn't sell well at the time, but for some reason is super rare now. So Gay Brooker says, would you ever teach at a public school? That is a no. I would make a lot more money than I make now, that is for sure. But the types of things I'd want to teach and the worldview stuff would be different, and just the process, and it's much more streamlined, and I wouldn't be as worried about stepping on toes. So I wouldn't do that. Techno Viking says he wrote fantasy books. Oh, he's talking about the author he recommended earlier. He wrote fantasy books heavily inspired by Tolkien, both in style and themes. The first trilogy, his Mythgar series, was meant to be a sequel to LOTR in real life. I highly recommend him. Good. Dennis McKiernan. I will write that down real quickly as someone I need to look up. Dennis McKiernan. Thank you for the recommendation. I like Tolkien-esque. The difference is he super like language heavy, like it's hard dense like Tolkien is, or does he just like the fantasy themes? Because if it's just the fantasy themes that he mimics, but not the dense language, then I'll absolutely love it. So we'll see. The next is Revan1207 says, speaking of Sanderson, did you do anything with his Kickstarter, pre-ordering the books, merch boxes, etc.? No. So with the Kickstarter, I was a huge fan of it. I was like, my family got mad at me because I was talking about the Kickstarter the whole time it was up, because it's a big deal. But the problem is that it was just not worth it. I don't read ebooks, and the only potentially affordable version was to get the just straight ebooks that was $10 a book, and I don't read ebooks, so it wouldn't be worth it to me. And the print books were insanely expensive. Like, I'm willing to pay the premium of $30 for a hardcover if I need to, and even some hardcovers are getting into the 35 or 40 range. And I am not at the point in life where I'm willing to spend the premium of, hundreds of dollars per books. Once you get past $40, I'm like, I'm tapped out. I can't do that. But I'm glad that they're able to do it. I think it's a good thing he did that. And I will read the Secret Project books when they release through Tor, which eventually they will, and they'll be traditionally published. But until then, I'm just it's too much for me. But I want the genre, and I want authors to go in this premium method, because I think it's a good thing for the economy, and I think it's a good thing for the book buying business. So I'm happy that it happened. I just didn't back it, but I could have, but it didn't need my help. It $40+ million by itself. Joel Williams, Jonathan, good to see a live stream. Actually live, strength to strength. Oh, thanks, Joe. Thanks for being here. Dingus Maximus says, do you think the Clone Wars Gambit duology is good? Thinking about reading it. I am very sad. I have about 15 EU novels. There are about 115. There are about 150 EU novels total. There are about 15 that I haven't read, and the Gambit duology is one of them. I can say secondhand, one of my college roommates read a lot of Star Wars books, particularly Clone Wars era books, because he liked those books. And he read the Gambit duology, and he loved it. And he thinks it's one of the best stories about Obi-Wan and Anakin. So he recommends it. But I'm not. I haven't read it, so I can't recommend it. I'm sorry. It's one of the few books I have not read in the EU. K-Book Reader 123 says, I finished my first experience in a 7th grade public classroom recently. My school is Mennonite Baptist town. Love discussing books with the students and having them discuss literature. Yes. One of the things that we have that we're starting is we're doing a book competition between the students and the teachers. There's 6 of us teachers and there's 110 students. And we're like, all right, we'll log every day how many pages we've read. And if the students win, they'll get like a free day, or they'll get to teach the class and we'll listen, or something like that. And if we win, if the teachers win, there's another kind of prize. But the students were all like, that's not fair. Mr. Cohn's just going to beat us all. And I was like, challenge. The students do. We have some students who would give me a run for my money though. So it'd be difficult. I find your advice useful since I am studying to be a teacher. Well, thank you. I'm glad that more people are getting into teaching, because we need more teachers out there, and more specific people who are interested in talking about genre books. Raffanetti says, I read Dooku Jedi Lost in preparation for Tales of Jedi. It is now in my top 3 Star Wars books. It is a very fun book, but because it was the first audio drama I read, it threw me for a loop. I'm not a huge audio drama fan. My problem is that you don't feel like, when you buy the hardcover, again, this is going back to what you're paying for. You're paying $30 for a hardcover of a script that you read that I read in like 3 hours. Whereas I buy a typical Star Wars book that's also $30 hardcover. It takes me 7 or 8 hours. So it's like, why is this worth it if it's a much bigger book, but it takes me almost no time to read? It just feels like they should drop the price or something with it. And I'm not someone that listens to audio dramas, so I'm not getting the full experience. So maybe if I did listen to it, I'd feel differently. But I did love the book, and I do love Kevin Scott's writing style, and he wrote Tempest. He also wrote Tempest Runner, which was superb. Tempest Runner is one of my favorite High Republic stories. It was really well done. Sorry about that, everyone. Alonzo R says, hi, I enjoy the channel and content. Keep posting. Have a good one. Cheers. Oh, thank you, Alonzo. Thanks for being here. Lazy Fishy says, not really book related, but are you watching Andor? And if you are, what did you think about the last episode? I am watching it. I am having a blast watching Andor. I wish more people were watching it and talking about it. But I would say Andor is not my favorite Star Wars show out. I think that Mandalorian is more enjoyable to me. I have more fun sitting down, grabbing popcorn and a drink, and watching Mandalorian. But Andor's a better show. The writing, the political dialogue, the high concept heists, everything about Andor is just brilliant. I love Andor. And it's just executed perfectly. And I thought that the last episode was the best episode of the series so far. and it paid off so much, and the dialogue was just killer, and there's no like plot problems that make me go, oh, that's so bad. So I think I'm really impressed with what Tony Gilroy has done, and I just wish more people were talking about it online. But it's not a book, so I don't talk about it on the channel. uh David L says, hi Jonathan, really like your channel. Do you read any Peter F. Hamilton sci-fi? Heard of him, not read him. On my book buying list is David Farland, The Rune Lords. Oh, I'm so glad more people need to read The Rune Lords. It's such a good series, particularly the first 4 books. I have not read Peter F. Hamilton, but that is one author where I haven't read them, but I've totally seen their name all over the bookstores and all over BookTube and stuff. So I would consider reading him. I just have other authors at the moment, but I've seen the name, and it's one of those, like, he's on one of those lists of to be bought. Like, one day I will buy this author's books when I'm in a good place for it. I'm just not there now. Revan said, going back to the Kickstarter about Brandon Sanderson, I didn't do the Kickstarter either, but at the time I was just starting to get into his work. The prices were definitely a bit much, but the books will be more premium than usual, so it makes sense. Yes. And for Elantris and Warbreaker, I intend to buy the Leatherbounds one day, because those 2 books are 2 of my favorite books of all time. Like, as a single novels, those are 2 of my favorite novels of all time. So I want to get the premium of those, which costs hundreds of dollars. So I do believe in buying the premiums eventually. It's just that every time he puts out a novel, I can't buy the premium version because I go broke, because he's insane, the machine. Revan 1207 says, do you remember which EU books you still need to read? Yes, I do. And I have a video coming out soon. I want to say either December or January with that list. It's about 15. It's the biggest chunk of them is the Fate of the Jedi series. That's, I think, 9 of them. And then there's 2 Gambit books, and then there's a few others. But that's about it. I'm really close to having it all. Another thing, another Revan, Andor didn't grab me for the first few episodes, but the last several have been excellent. Yes, the weakest episodes of Andor are the first 3 that they dropped from me. And they're well-written episodes. They're just not exciting, and they're just not what I would have wanted. Episodes 4 through 10 have been on an incredible level, and they've just done everything that I would have wanted them to do, and they did everything that they needed to do. And I wish they had started more with 4, or at least expedited the process, or dumped them all in chunks, done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8 and 10. Like, if they'd done them like that, I think that the fans would have grabbed onto it faster. Instead, doing 1, 2, 3, and then doing 1 a week did not help the brand, did not help everything go through. So Gay Book Reader 123 says, I got to one of the most liberal colleges in the country. A lot of people in the education program are Christians. My KGV only biblical classmate wrote a 1,200-page Baptist-inspired fantasy novel. Ooh, that's cool. That's Baptist-inspired fantasy novel. That's interesting, because the genre is moving away from Christian themes. They've obviously been prevalent in the fantasy genre for the last 50, 60 years, but biblical themes have not been present more recently. It's more dipped out. So I'd be interested in seeing a more modern take with biblical themes. So Brackington, hello. Have you read Dawn of the Jedi Into the Void? I read that one forever ago, and I don't remember much about it. I remember it was one of the first, and that was one of the first ones I read. It didn't grab me, unfortunately. I agree, Andor is amazing and highly recommend. Ninja Badger, did you have any advice for people who can't swim? For half a second, I was like, why are you bringing up not swimming? And I assume you are referencing my the last episode of Andor, which was just so sad, so sad, and it was such a great moment. And I spent the whole time afterwards going, did he survive? Please tell me he survived. I need to know if he survived. So that was a great moment. So well done. Hey, Josiah Peterson. Hey, Jonathan. Hello, Josiah. Finally caught another live stream. Just finished Lords of Chaos on my first Wheel of Time read. Lord of Chaos is a big turning point for the series. You see some epic high points, and you see some low points that are like, whew, interesting. We're going here. And so you are approaching what people call the slog. You may feel at times you want to quit, but it is totally worth it. I promise you, if you make it to the end of the series, you will say the slog was worth it. But if you just quit, you will feel the slog wasn't worth it. But the end of the series, the last 4 books are just so darn good that you need to finish them. So I hope you enjoy the slog. But yes, 4, 5, and 6. It's like 1, 2, and 3 are great books. Then 4, 5, and 6 like raise the level a lot. Then it dips down to the lowest point with the slog, and then it goes to its best point in the last 4. At least that's what I'd say. So Joe Williams says, okay, have a book related question. How do you cope with bookshelves in space? It's a problem I constantly battle with. It is a problem I am about to battle with because I just bought new bookshelves and I filled them up instantly. And I'm getting close to the point where I can't have more bookshelves in this room because there's other furniture in this room that's out of camera angle that I can't show. So I have that problem. I am about to have that problem fixed in a couple of months. I anticipate moving, and if everything works out well, that's the typical YouTuber thing, is to say that you're always moving, but I am moving to a new apartment most likely. So if that all works out, I will probably have more space for at least another year. But I am feeling that. I'm feeling that. Yeah. The problem with me is bookshelves are so annoying to set up. It only takes 2 hours, but it is like the most frustrating 2 hours in my life, and I hate having to set them up. But if I can find one that's existing, that's already set up, that'd be even better. Luke Follett, have you read The Phantom Tollbooth? I have not, although they made it mandatory reading for once I graduated high school, they started making it mandatory reading for one class. I forgot which class it was, so I just passed it. Josiah Peterson has also finished The Sword of Kaigen, a standalone indie published fantasy. I highly recommend. It's going to be a while before I read another indie or standalone as good as The Sword of Kaigen. I've heard people recommend it. I know Murphy Napier loved it. I believe Daniel Green and Elliot Brooks read it. I'm not for sure on those two, but I know Murphy loved it. So they talk about that all the time. Revan 1207 says, I actually grabbed some EU books yesterday, and the place I found them had most of the Fate of the Jedi. I would have gotten them, but it'll be so long till I can read them, so I thought I'd just wait. Yes, I highly recommend with the EU, you may find like all the New Jedi Order, but don't read the New Jedi Order until you've read, some of the setup books. And don't read the Fate of the Jedi until you've read Legacy of the Force, because A, things will be spoiled for you, but B, you will miss the emotional buildup that the characters have had. So I try to get everyone to read everything in publication order. Now, there are some Old Republic novels that you could read before reading some of the later EU books, because even though they came out later, they have there's literally no way that they could affect it. But anything post Return of the Jedi, you should read in publication order, because it'll completely change the way you view the books. Revan 1207 says, I think Stellan Gios would appreciate some swimming advice as well. That's mean. Thomas Jens says, hiya, love your recommendations, been introduced to many great books. Reading Star Wars Bloodline, had to put it down for a while as it was so intense. Chapter 22, speechless. I don't know which chapter that is. If that seems... There is a big event that happens in Bloodline that really, if I say it, it'll give it away if you haven't read it yet. But I'm pretty sure by chapter 22, you probably already passed it. So if it has to do with the big action sequence that happens, yeah, that one's big. Unless, you're talking about the reveal. Okay, you're talking about the reveal. That I just got that. Okay, yes. Okay. I got you now. That is a big moment there. Bloodline's my favorite. Well, not one of my favorite. It's one of my top 10 for sure. Canon novels, and does not get enough credit because it came out at a time where they weren't allowed to reveal much about the sequel trilogy, and yet they had to reveal a lot in that book. So it was a very awkward book, and I think it did a job admirably. Gay Bookery 123 says, I think Scholastic forced Collins to write the Hunger Games in first person, present tense, so that the audience couldn't see the intense violence of the children fighting. Katniss summarizes the little she sees. Yeah, that makes sense. To make it first person narrows what you can see, and also makes it easier for them to block it out. Oh, she just doesn't want to talk about that. But first person, just frustrates me because you're spending too much time in an individual's mind and not enough in the world. And that's why like epic fantasy novels are traditionally all third person and there's huge casts. Whereas the Hunger Games, it's first person singular. That's why I think Harry Potter works a little bit better because you're always following Harry. Harry is always your point of view, but it's never first person where you're literally in his mind. It's like you understand what's happening in his mind, but you're also able to see other perspectives happening as well, but you're still following Harry. It's complex discussion, first person versus third person. Just don't do second person. That's the one thing that's worse than first. I have read a couple second person books and I was like, nope, that is not for me. The Blue Pig says, would you read novelizations of Andor? I would, but the problem with TV shows is they're nearly impossible to do a good novelization for. Like they did novelizations of the first 2 seasons of Mandalorian, but they were like middle grade novelizations and they left out a ton and they didn't really add much. And really the Star Wars novelizations in general have, I found, to be lackluster, that they don't add huge amounts. So if they did like one novelization for each sequence, like maybe the first 3 episodes is a novelization and then they had 4, 5, 6 was a novelization, that type of thing, that'd be interesting. But I just don't think that it would work well to novelize the entire series. I think they just have to leave out too much and they just be sprinting through it, depending on who did it. If Alexander Freed did it, because he did a good job on the Rogue One novelization, it's the only Alexander Freed novel that I truly like. I think that'd be the smartest decision for it. But anyone could do it because I think it's a writer proof story because the story is just so good. It'd be hard to mess it up. Josiah Peterson says, yeah, I absolutely plan to finish The Wheel of Time. Even The Lord of Chaos, unpopular opinion, was my least favorite of the 6 I've read. And I'm nervous about the slog, but I'll push through. Yes. So Murphy Napier actually, she disliked Lords of Chaos a lot. And she was like, and this is supposed to be the high water mark. But she realized its potential at the end. So I think it's definitely worth it by the end. Revan 1207 says, I've been reading the EU sort of out of order, but a lot of the post Return of the Jedi I'm reading in order. Pretty much the only big post Return of the Jedi series I'm not reading before the rest is the X-Wing series. Yeah, X-Wing, it's still like there are specific things, like you have to read X-Wing before you read iJedi and before you read The Hand of Thrawn, but you could read the Jedi Academy trilogy before you read the X-Wing series or after. And the Jedi Academy trilogy was written before, but you just have to learn how to navigate. And that's why there's a plethora of videos on suggestions and there's people who can make recommendations for you. But definitely like look up and see, all right, are there through line characters? Are there through line plots that will affect it? And if yes, read them in publication order. And if no, read however you like. Blue Pig says, what is second person even? It's like when you read, you open the door, you walk into the room, you see the lamp on the table, it's like you did this, you do that. And there's a reason it is really rare. Like I'd say for me, what I've read is like, 70-80% of the books I've read and heard of are like third person. And then you have a good 15-20% are first person, and then there's like 0.001% are second person because they're just not popular. Yeah, it's you're right, Blue Pig, it is weird. Lazy Fishy says, I would love to see a novel about Anakin and Ahsoka, just like Brotherhood, about how Anakin trained Ahsoka, and then I would have no problem with Mike Chen to write it. Yes, if they did that book, Mike Chen needs to write it. Mike Chen is the absolute prequel person. Any prequel novel now, I'm like, just give it to Chen. The only difference is if it has Qui-Gon, maybe give it to Claudia Gray. But otherwise, give Mike Chen everything because he's got the prequels. He's got it down. It is a rare thing for me to read a book and say that author did so well with that book, I would be comfortable giving them the keys to an entire series or to an entire era. Like Drew Karpyshyn pretty much had free reign in the Old Republic because people thought his Old Republic novels were just that good. That's how I feel about Mike Chen with the prequels. I will trust him with any prequel novel that he could write. And I think he'd do a good job with Ahsoka because and we've already known he can do a good job with Anakin. I'd like to see that type of book. I want to see a Clone Wars series like the New Jedi Order type series or something where you follow actually, to make a better comparison, I'd like to see a Clone Wars series that's similar to like the Jedi Apprentice series, where you're following a master and an apprentice throughout the Clone Wars. And what would make it interesting is you would get hints about things that are happening in the timeline. Oh, we'd hear about the Battle of Geonosis. Oh, and we just had the Battle of Christophsis. Oh, and now there was this thing with this plague on Naboo. And you'd hear about all this stuff happening, but you'd actually be following this master and apprentice who are doing totally different stuff. And they'd be interacting with, maybe Yoda shows up in one book and maybe Mace in another. But for overall, it's following two small characters, a master and apprentice, who are not huge, well-known characters. Maybe make the master more like a member of the council or something, but for sure make them not. I want to see a series that's not Anakin, Obi-Wan, or Ahsoka, because I want to explore those new characters, see what the B team's like for the Jedi Order. So, Gay Book Reader 123 says, I would teach the Hunger Games in a Christian school. Mockingjay is a great fictional lesson about PTSD. It is an interesting book about PTSD. I think there's just enough language that we wouldn't be able to teach it at my school. Also, there's just some of the themes might get some of the romantic themes might get some of the parents angry. It depends on the age group. If you're teaching it to high schoolers, I don't think they'd have a problem with it. Middle school, maybe. Certainly not in the age group I'm teaching. Certainly not there. There are discussions to be had. They just taught. They taught. What was the name of that book? City of Ember, and that was about as much into the fantasy sci-fi genre. My high school, when I was a senior, they made us read The Hobbit, and I thought it was way too easy a read. And I talked with the teacher, and she said, yeah, the problem is she felt that the Lord of the Rings was too hard to read. And there was no Tolkien in the middle, really, that she thought would be good for us. And so that's why she stuck with The Hobbit. But I think that Lord of the Rings is like a genre story that could work well for our school. Revan 12 Cent says, although I am currently working on the New Jedi Order while not having read some of the later New Republic era, but I will be reading the New Jedi Order onward in order. Yes, that minimum within an individual series, for sure you have to read it in the order it was written. Especially with an individual series. But if you've missed a little bit here and there, it's okay. New Jedi Order, just if people talk to me about it and they talked about how much they loved it, and it was like, there's so many books that didn't hook me in the series. But when I think about the series as a whole, there is none like it in the EU. There's none that has had the impact that it had. Even Legacy of the Force, which an individual book of Legacy and the Force was probably better than a random individual book in the New Jedi Order series. But the Legacy of the Force as a whole just didn't work for me in the way that the New Jedi Order did. It just packed a punch. It just packed a wallop. Gay Book Reader 123 says, have you ever read Divergent or Maze Runner? Both were published among the wave of Hunger Games. No. Of the two, I'm more interested in reading Maze Runner because it was written by Dashner, who went to school with Sanderson and Dan Wells and was taught by David Farland as part of that Mormon community there. I'm really interested in reading the Maze Runner because of that. Not so much because of the movies. Haven't heard great things about those. But I'd be interested in reading that. Divergent, I've heard mixed things on. So I would be interested in reading it. I'm trying to get into the YA genre. It's just not like a genre I'm heavily into. Like I've read recently, so I've read several years ago the Harry Potter books, and then I've read now the Hunger Games series. I've read Hit and Strike by Delilah Dawson. I've read some middle grade, and I've read some Star Wars YA and a few fantasy YAs. What were those called? The Throne of Glass. So I have read some YA. It's just not a genre. It's like that pulls me in. I might read one every month or so, but it just does not do any. It does not do the work for me of hooking me the way fantasy, sci-fi, or tie-in fiction does. Josiah Peterson says, how excited are you for The Lost Metal? I'm pretty pumped. I've heard great things so far. Of course, I am. That is, of course, my favorite, not my favorite, my most anticipated book of the next several months. Super pumped about it. I'm excited because it's actually in stock at my local bookstore. They can't really sell it yet because it's strict on sale till Tuesday, but it is it's there. Whereas a book that came out at the beginning of November by Nick Martell, who's a much smaller author, I ordered the book weeks ago and it still has not arrived yet. And so I'm just like, I'm going to read Lost Metal first because that one's got there first and I'll be able to get it first. But I'm really excited for it. I'm interested to see where he goes with Steris and her plot line in this one. And I'm also a little bit nervous about what they're going to do with the Greater Cosmere. I'm nervous that like the connections have gotten too much. The reason I love the Cosmere up until Rhythm of War and Warbreaker was it felt like everything was self-contained, but there was Hoyd jumping around. Oh, there was this little reference here. But once I got to Rhythm of War, it felt like I was overwhelmed with the references and connections and everything going there. And it felt like if you haven't read this and you haven't read this and you don't remember this, and there were entire characters that I read in that book, and it's like, oh, you're supposed to remember them. And there were this huge character in this other book, and I'm like, but that's not what they were called. So it's so hard for me for the references and connections. It's too much. But I'm still excited because as an enjoyable novel, I'm sure it'll be amazing because I've loved them all. Gay book reader, or sorry, no, I'm on Revan 1207. I really want to read something with Anakin and Obi-Wan between the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. I feel like there's not that much explored in Legends or canon. There is not. In between Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, you have The Approaching Storm, which I didn't care for. You have Outbound Flight, which is one of the most amazing Legends novels, but it only has Anakin and Obi-Wan in it for like a little bit of the book. It's not an Anakin and Obi-Wan book. And then there's Rogue Planet. And Rogue Planet was fine. I didn't love it, but it had some great connections. Read Rogue Planet right about the time that you're reading the New Jedi Order. Ties in well with that, as does Outbound Flight. Both of those tie in well with the New Jedi Order. But yeah, you're right. There isn't much in between. I don't even need Obi-Wan and Anakin. I just need books set in that time frame because I think that's a really interesting time frame because you see the political splintering, you see droid armies being built more, things like that happening. April Career 123 says, are you working on any novels in your downtime? Are you talking about like for reading or for writing? For reading, of course, I read all the time. That's my downtime. For writing, I have written novels. They are not ready for publication, and I do not want to put in the effort yet to get them publication ready. But I would consider it someday, just maybe next summer if I have the time next summer. This summer was too chaotic for me to do it because it was my first. I was getting ready to teach for the first time. I was moving. I had a lot of things happening in my family. So this summer was possible, but next summer, if I stay teaching the same subject, I don't need to spend as much time prepping, and I also don't need to spend as much time moving like I did this last summer. So hopefully this summer, but again, may not even happen. So Revan 1207 says, it's old news now, but did you hear that Dan is joining Dragonsteel and will be writing in the Cosmere? I haven't read his books yet, but I'm very curious to see how that will go. Yes, I did hear that news. I was absolutely astounded and happy because I love Dan Wells. I actually got introduced to Dan Wells from his podcast with Brandon, the Intentionally Blank, which I think a lot of people did, which is funny because that podcast probably, even though he hasn't really made money from the podcast itself, Dan hasn't, he has made money because people like me have bought his books. So I started there, and then I said, you know what, I'm going to try to read this guy's books because I want to support him and Brandon and people from that group that were students of David Farland. And I just want to see what he has. So I bought some of his books, and let me just grab them out of camera angle real quick. And so I would, of course, start with his first book, I Am Not a Serial Killer, which is an amazing, amazing book. And it is refreshing to have a horror novel that is not filled with sex or language. Of course, there's violence in this, but it's manageable. And the main character I really love. And then I read Mr. Monster, which is my favorite book of his. I love absolutely every detail of this book except for part of the ending. But even then, the ending is actually really it's a horror novel, but it really has a lot of a lot of fantasy themes in a horror novel. You'll get it if you read it. And then the third book in the trilogy, I Don't Want to Kill You. By the way, titles, I'm Not a Serial Killer and I Don't Want to Kill You. Brilliant titles. I thought these were hilarious. and I love taking pictures with him. And I met him, and before I'd even read any of his books, I talked with him for about 45 minutes. It was fantastic because there was no one else in line, and it was just great to see him and talk with him. And then I did an interview with him, which is on the channel, which was great. He did about a 10-minute interview, which was fun. And then he wrote Ghost Station, which was a good book, but it was his least good that I've read. And then Extreme Makeover. If you want to read messed up, his mind is messed up if it comes up with whatever this horrible awesomeness is. So I'm very excited for it. And yes, I heard it, and I jumped up and down with excitement. I really still want him to write his own novels by himself, and I hope he still does. But I feel like he feels that he's not going to make book sales by himself, and he'll sell better with Brandon. But the problem is Brandon sells real high, Dan sells real low. You combine them, I feel like they're only going to be middling. I don't think that they're going to do as well if Brandon only wrote by himself, because there's going to be a lot of people who think, oh, well, just Dan's writing everything and Brandon's just kicking back, like how people view Patterson. Obviously, Patterson does write a lot of his books, but people don't view him that way. So, Ollie says, I actually found The Lost Metal in a local bookstore today and got to buy it. Yep, sometimes they forget about the strict on sale and they just put it out there, but I'm super excited to read it. Next one says, you should make a video of your reading schedule because it's fascinating. You can read so much and still function as a teacher. Yes, that's a good idea. Maybe I'll do that one in like January or December when I have the time to make that have a video. But yeah. Strikadodst, I'm sorry, I butchered your name. Hey man, I just want to tell you, love your content. You actually got me into Star Wars books, which I now love. Oh, I'm so thankful. Yes, there are a lot of people who have like reviewed Star Wars books, but there are not many traditional booktubers who also cover Star Wars. I didn't want my channel just to be one because I wanted to introduce people to all new genres, particularly the hard genres. But I also wanted to include Star Wars because that's a bedrock. That's what got me into reading the Star Wars books initially. Now, I love fantasy reading more than Star Wars, but Star Wars is what got me in the door. So I still view it as very important. Reverend 1207 says, already read Outbound Flight and Rogue Planet is on the shelf right now. Good for you. You are handling everything. You are doing your research, Revan. Anton Oya, hello. Hi, I'm from Spain and watching your videos got me into Star Wars books. Thanks thank you and keep going. Your channel is great. Thank you so much. Revan 1207 says, I was also introduced to him. He means Dan Wells with the podcast LOL. He's great. I need a Cosmere food heist. Food heist. Yes, food heists are great. I am shocked he has not written one yet. For all that he loves, I'm sure they will have a Cosmere food heist eventually because it's now synonymous. Before it was Dan writes the messed up novels. Now it has to be Dan has the food heist. You cannot have a book by Brand. You cannot have them writing together and not do a food heist. I don't even actually love the segment food heist that much in his in their videos, but the love that they have for food heists and just the fun that they have with each other is just what makes it so worth it. So no, is that Noich says hello there. Hello. Ashley Hoybert says, hey man, any books you hate that BookTube loves? I just read Swan Song and absolutely despise it. Yeah, I've heard mixed things on Swan Song. Books that I hate that BookTube loves. Give me a second to look through because the books that mostly books I've loved from BookTube have been generally books that BookTube's loved, and some of the ones I've hated have been ones that BookTube hated. I'm trying to go through right now through my list. I did not particularly love Gardens of the Moon, the first Malazan book, but everyone says it's the worst book in the series. But they still love Malazan. That one. I'll have to think about that one because there's not really books. I haven't had many like that where I've despised it, but BookTube's loved it. Usually, I line up a little bit more. There's been books that BookTubers have loved, and I was just like, I liked it, but I didn't love it. Like the whole Poppy War trilogy. BookTube loves that, and I was like, yeah, it was pretty good. Yeah, it was pretty good. That's how I felt. Do you ever read apocalyptic fiction? No. Extreme Makeover, to talk about a second ago, is kind of apocalyptic horror. But no, I don't really read apocalyptic fiction. I've heard World War Z was interesting, but it's just I've not gotten into apocalyptic fiction. But of course, I'm trying to reach out into new genres. This year was the first time I ever read um, uh, like legal thrillers, and last year was the first time I'd ever read mysteries. So I'm trying to get into new genres. So I might get into that genre next year. Who knows? But we'll see what happens. Noit says, is Light of the Jedi still your favorite High Republic book or Rising Storm? I love them both, but I think I like Rising Storm a little bit more with the whole Stellan arc. I think that the brilliance of the opening scenes of Light of the Jedi are some of the most amazing scenes, and the twist towards the end visually of how the ships, the way they describe the one ship coming like this, that was amazing. But I think that as a whole, The Rising Storm is a better book. You're more connected with the characters, and the ending just hits. The ending of the Rising Storm just hits so well. So I'd say probably Rising Storm, but they're so close together that it's hard to say one or the other. But I'd say probably Rising Storm if at the moment. But yeah. Let's see. Josiah Peterson says technically Edge Dancer with Lift is a food heist. LOL. Ooh, I have Edge Dancer in the Arcanum Unbounded, so that makes me want to read it. But that's Brandon Sanderson. I mean, that was before he combined with Dan Wells. Dan Wells is the one that is the food heist person. Brandon's just along for the ride on the food heists. So, but that, oh man, now you're gonna make me read Edge Dancer now because I need to. Now I need to. Booker 123 says, is there a lovely woman in your life? You are a teacher after all. That is a nice, stable career. There is not, much as I wish that there were. But I am still young. I hope they say I'm still young. So Revan 1207 says, although I've heard Mistborn is technically a food heist if you count ingesting metals as food. That I hadn't heard that before. That is a pretty unique take. No, Mistborn's not a food heist. No, for it to be a food heist, it has to be like you're getting like the world's greatest amount of cheese that you're stealing, or that you are buying like this, or that you're stealing this insane amount of wine. It can't just be the metals that they ingest as part of the magic system. No. That's funny though. Daniel R says, how long does it take you to read a book? It depends, Daniel. I read a lot of books really fast. If it's like a 300 to 400 page novel in the genres, like science fiction, fantasy, tie-in fiction, it takes me about 3 days is my average. Sometimes 4, but usually 3. I can read about 100 pages a day is my general average. But for a longer book, I typically set aside time to read more. So I try to get a longer book done that's like 700 or 800 pages. I still try to get it in like 4 or 5 days, but sometimes that doesn't even work. So it changes, but the average is I read on average 8 to 10 books a month. And so it's like 3 to 4 days per book on average. And I read about maybe, I don't know, 3,000 pages, maybe I don't know, I'd say 3,000 to 4,000 pages per month. So there's all the math in there, but yeah, about 3 days is the average for a book. Ashley, I'm just saying I want to buy every cover that Daryl K. Sweet did. Yes, someone else who loves Daryl K. Sweet like I do. He is the only person that I've ever bought an art of book because his art is amazing, and people shunt him to the side because of the styles of other authors like the Ewell brothers, Stephen Ewell and Paul Ewell, or because of the artwork by Michael Whalen. And Michael Whalen is a solid cover artist. Like, he's amazing. But to me, no one has ever or will ever reach the heights that Daryl K. Sweet. His style is exactly what I would, if I could design my own books, I would ask for a Daryl K. Sweet style. Even though it might not sell well among audiences, that's what I like to see on my bookshelves. His books, if I faced books out, like put a book like faced out like this instead of turning it spine, like all of them are spine, I would have all the Daryl K. Sweet ones faced out because of how much I like them. So Andrea says, can you read a Star Trek book? from Joy in your history student. I do read a lot of Star Trek. Which one would I say is my favorite? My favorite Star Trek books are anything by John Jackson Miller. He's the best. Booker says, could a fantasy novel be written in first person present tense with only one POV? Yes, it could, and I'm sure that there have been some. I think with present tense POV. I've heard. I know they've been past tense. I don't know about present tense, but it's possible. It's possible. It's one of those things. It either hasn't been done or just hasn't caught on. But absolutely, it's possible. What time? Kemuel? I hope I'm saying that right. What time of day do you read? Afternoons, evenings. I usually get home from work. Usually about. I get home from work about 4:30 usually, and I eat then. So about 5 or 6, I sit down and I read till about 8 or 9, and then I go watch something while I do ironing or while I get ready for bed. 6 to 9. That's about the time frame that I read. How many books do you read in a week? It depends. If I'm doing a tome, like that's like a really long novel, it'll take me all week. But usually 2 to 3 is I'd say 2.5. 2.5 is the good average. Thomas Gent says, do you ever struggle with choosing what book to read next? Can't decide between Sword of Shannara or Sum of All Men. Easiest read. Sword of Shannara is an easy read, but it's so derivative that you might get bored with it. Sum of All Men is a great original book that takes the themes of epic fantasy and does them well. I'd recommend Sum of All Men first, but both are good. I don't really struggle with the what to read next because I have so many books, but I also am much a planner. I plan out the month. All right, I know I need to read 2 Star Trek books this month. I need to read 1 tome. I need to read 1 mystery. I need to read 1 political thriller. I need to read 1, I plan it out. And so I know, okay, so this new fantasy is releasing then. So I have to build my schedule around when that novel comes out to read the new release, or a new Star Wars book is coming out, or I have this book shipping in on this date and I want to read it when it comes out. So what book can I read between now and then that won't take me too long, but also won't be too short? Because I don't want to read a really short book and then I have a day of no reading, but I also don't want to read a really long book and now I have to put off the new release. So I just do a lot of planning with my reading. That's about what I can do. Where did your reading come from? Your parents? Yeah, they loved reading and they tried to get me into reading, but it just didn't work. And they do read now, but actually it's more reverse of I get them into reading more now. I would say that my reading primarily came from I read some Star Wars books that really hooked me because I loved Star Wars, and then I realized there's more. And then I read Sword of Shannara because it was by a Star Wars author, and also I heard it was like Lord of the Rings but easier to read, and I loved that. And then that got me into fantasy, and then I read Angel Mass by Timothy Zahn, and that was my first science fiction novel that I read. And then I realized there's more science fiction novels I could read, and then I read mysteries and legal thrillers, and I started just branching out into new genres. So I found something that I loved, Star Wars, and that was the baseline of this is what I'm starting with. And then I started making connections to other things I could potentially like, started reading things that I was interested in, and that's how I got into reading. I have a couple of more minutes. I'm going to do about 3 more minutes. So do you, Lazy Fishy, do you read 2 books at a time? If I have to. When I was in college and high school, I did, because I'd have to read books for those. But if I don't have to, I read 1 book at a time because I really like just knocking it out, reading it all. Mass Studio says, hi, Jonathan. Sorry, I've been gone for a while. I've been busy, so I haven't been keeping up with the streams. Well, there haven't been that many streams, so it's okay. They have the last one, I think, was like late September, because I think some people have noticed this in some of my videos. I got super sick in the month of October to the point where I could barely talk without coughing, which was really good for teaching, as you would expect. No, but I didn't record many videos, and then just recently I started recording a bunch to try to catch up. I never lost time. I never had a time where I should have had a video out and didn't. I always had a video out, but that's because I had a big backlog from September that I put out, and then October I recorded nothing, and now in November recording a lot. Revan says, I keep track of the rough number of pages words I read each month, and October was my best month ever. 3,300 pages, roughly 1.3 million words. That's impressive. I don't keep up with words. Words is too much to keep up with, but I do keep up with pages because Goodreads keeps up with pages because I pick the selection. I select the edition that I'm reading in Goodreads, and then I check, okay, this one has 400 pages, that edition has 400 pages, so I'll go with that. And that way it keeps up my pages. Although sometimes if it has like a bunch of like back material, like appendices, it'll throw it off. But yeah, I keep up with pages too. My average, like I generally do 40 to 50,000 pages per year. That's my somewhere in there. Michael Pop says, for someone starting in the fiction books, what series would you recommend first? So if we're talking about fantasy, I recommend Brandon Sanderson's standalones, Elantris and Warbreaker, easy to get into. Also, I'd recommend Shannara if you want Lord of the Rings, but easier to read. Rune Lords, great opening, especially the first 4 books. Also, I think that The Wheel of Time is hard, but it's worth it for a beginner because it set a lot of the tone for fantasy. I'm trying to think about other series you could read. Harry Potter, if you want to get into young adult fantasy. If you want to get into science fiction, I recommend anything by Timothy Zahn. He's great. I also would recommend the Honor Arrington series I'm getting into now. So, what is your thoughts on the King Kriller Chronicles? Have not read them because the 3rd book hasn't come out, and also because there were other fantasy books ahead of my list. Like, I'd love to read them because I've heard mixed things. Some people I know love them, some people hate them, some people have mixed views. I think I'll highly enjoy them, but the fact that the author hasn't turned them in, the 3rd book, is just frustrating to me, and I feel like he has not much of an excuse after 15 years. So I'm not particularly excited, but I'll read it one day. Video idea: make short videos of book versus movie, like the Hunger Games series. That's a good video idea. I might do that. Jen says, interesting. Thanks, Jonathan. Rune Lords it is. You decided for me. Oh, thanks. Once I embraced my status as a history major college, I basically have only read nonfiction history books for like 3 years. All this nonfiction has made my brain mushy. I am returning to fiction. Yes! Well, I have a huge backlog of videos if you want to look into stuff. Which is your favorite Star Trek series? TOS, TNG, DS9, etc. All right. So this is a complicated answer. I will condense it into the quickest answer I can say. Favorite cast, Voyager. Favorite captain, Janeway. Favorite TV show is probably Next Generation, but I absolutely love the TOS movies. The TOS movies are some of the best Star Trek out there. Wrath of Khan, Search for Spock, Voyage Home, and the Undiscovered Country are like amazing Star Trek stories, like amazing. But I do really like the books, and I put the books above everything. I put the post Nemesis books above all the TV shows, all the movies, all the everything else. The post Nemesis novels are the best. And of the post Nemesis books, I love the Fall series. I love the Destiny trilogy, and most of all, I love the Prey trilogy by John X. Miller. Since you do not like the classics, do you like Orwell? I read Animal Farm and I enjoyed it. I just didn't love it. I have 1984, just haven't gotten to it. But I'm almost scared to get to it because of how eerie it is. Michael Pop says, do you like the old Predator and Alien books? My brother-in-law has them, and I have the invitation to read them, but I just haven't gotten into the Alien Predator books. Along with the Alien tie-ins above, have you read any of the Indiana Jones tie-in novels? No, but I know that James Luceno, who wrote for Star Wars, got into those, and I of course love tie-in fiction. My tie-in fiction has mostly been Star Wars and Star Trek, but I have Halo tie-in books to read, and I have Gears of War books to read next. And I do want to get into Mass Effect books once I can find them, because you can't find them anywhere. And I guess you could count the Drizzt books as well as the whole Forgotten Realms as like media tie-in books. Says The Witcher is what got me into reading fantasy regularly. I just read books occasionally before. Yeah, I've heard good things about that, and it's good. Every book is someone's favorite, and every book got someone into reading. So I love that there's all these different things that we can talk about, but you can have areas that you like to talk about, areas you don't like to talk about, but there are certain things that really get you in, and some things that you're like, it's not for me. And I want to get into the Witcher series eventually. So last question, Michael Pop says, favorite old canon Star Wars book or series? If you mean old canon, if you mean the expanded universe, favorite book is Kenobi, far and away, far and away. If we're talking book series, I would probably uh, mm, probably say the original Thrawn trilogy, but I'd have to the Hand of Thrawn duology. The Hand of Thrawn duology is my favorite series. So, all right, I am sorry I have to cut this off. It has been a great hour. I'm so glad. It's been so long since I've had a live stream, and I'll have one in December. Not sure the exact date yet, but I'll give you guys a heads up. Thank you so much to everyone for being here, participating in the chat, and I look forward to having more videos because I have a lot of videos that are really fun. Some ranking videos. I have a video on how I adapt the Cosmere. Ooh, that is an interesting video. I think I'm going to make a lot of people mad with that video. So can't wait to show you all the new videos I have coming up. So thank you very much and cheers.